How are you today? I'm Frédéric Joly, someone who cares, someone who would like to address a lot of things that's going on. As you probably might know, amid the US-Canada relationship on these threatening of tariffs, the border issue between our two countries, and mainly the relationship between Canadians and American entrepreneurs, citizens, political people, and everything. It seems that a lot of commentators west to the Rideau River has put on the Canadian identity isn't one-way patriotism. And I'm here today to talk about that with you. Yes, because I often appreciate Dr. Jordan Peterson insights, and as a fellow Canadian, well, if I still identify as such, I respect his efforts to propose and articulate societal value propositions. As an entrepreneur specializing in customer success and with technology, my goal is to provide the best tools, the best application, and the best services based on science and technological advancement to improve the human experience and ways of working for people who use those many tools and those many processes to drive success client relationship. This naturally makes me sensitive to a broader civilizational questions and our shared commitment to freedom and coexistence. One of my guiding principles, which I often use to close my podcast here at the Dare Real Agile or at AFJ Podcasts, is remember who you truly are. Remember who you really are. You are wonderful. You are powerful. And that power, what is that power that make you powerful and wonderful? This power resides in your choice, your capacity to make choice, to be whoever you wanted to be, and to do whatever you wanted to do, and always with respect from one another. So last week, Dr. Peterson released a video titled Canada Must Offer Alberta More Than Trump Could. And by the way, I put the link in the description of this YouTube and Rumble video for you to go see this message to Canada from Dr. Jordan Peterson. While I agree with the premise that Alberta deserves more autonomy and economic opportunities, I completely reject the false and misleading narratives about Quebec's roles in the Canadian Federation, especially regarding equalization payments. Dr. Peterson is not alone in perpetuating this misconception. Many commentators west to the Rideau River push for this. Sorry about that. It's not a real life, but we are right now experiencing trouble. Okay, so I'm sorry about that. And so it's all new system, and now I'm receiving messages. So I've been distracted. Sorry, but I won't cut it because I'd like to be authentic. Even though I'm reading you a letter right now that been inspired and fueled by the message to Canada from Dr. Peterson I just mentioned. So let's go back to it. So I completely reject that false and misleading narratives about Quebec's roles in the Canadian Federation, specifically, should I say better, regarding the equalization payment. So as I was saying, Dr. Peterson in his last video is not alone in perpetuating this misconception. Many commentators west to the Rideau River push a narrative that paints Quebec as a burden on the rest of Canada. Oh la la, we are a burden. This is so 1995. And you remember 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago, in October weekend, at the eve of the last Quebec referendum into its independence, that you often call separation. There's no such thing. But anyways, that was really funny for me because that's what this love in. Everybody were coming from all across Canada, from the west, from the east, from coast to coast to coast, to share their love. We were not a burden. Oh my goodness. And we almost lost this beautiful Canada country, as we are going to maybe lost it into an integration of a new continental North American Union. Think twice, blink twice. So anyway, as I said, I reject that kind of narratives that leads to a Quebec bashing once again. Because, some even claim that Quebec is unfairly siphoning resources from Alberta, not all the other provinces of Canada. Of course not. You have to get to a duality again. So no. Quebec is unfairly siphoning resources from Alberta. This rhetoric, Dr. Peterson and all, is not only inaccurate, it fuels division and resentment. And by the way, this is not very irresponsible citizenship that open to a civil discourse. And my intent in today's clip, as an entrepreneur myself, as a responsible citizen myself, who would like to invite everyone to my side of the table and hoping that you're going to invite me on your side of the table, and that civil discourse. No rhetoric, no sophism, just a real conversation in the market of ideas to find what's unite us instead of what's divide us, and not creating resentment between each other in front of complexity such as equalization payment, tariff, and trade wars. So, in this response, I aim to do three things to everyone, not just one side, every side. One, dispel the myths and stop the unfair scapegoating of Quebec, and maybe others for that matter, used often by rhetoricians. Secondly, I would like to provide an historical and fiscal reality check, not based solely on my opinion or my point of view, but on facts and statistics that are happening right now before our eyes. And thirdly and lastly, I would like to encourage Quebecers to stand with Albertans and the fight for a more decentralized Canada. Yes, you hear me well. So, and this first element that I call stop bashing Quebec, or stop bashing anyone you'd like to point that it's its fault, pointing finger won't get you too far. Quebec bashing is neither productive nor historically justified, and you're just going to fume even more division, and probably the 35% of us in the province, la belle province, will rise up more and towards even greater number of 30 years ago when we almost achieved a yes for the independence of Quebec. So the notion by itself that Quebec enjoys some kind of privilege status within Canada is misleading. The provinces like Alberta has faced its own economic and political struggles, particularly due to an over-centralized federal system dominated by Ontario. Yes, it's not Quebec's fault if Ontario take all the space and all the dominance. So let's take a step back. It's not about my identity, but I'm a French-Canadian entrepreneur whose ancestors settled in New France in 1662 with my first great-grandfather, Nicolas Joly, opening lands in Rivière-des-Prairies at the east end of the now Montreal Island. So, and my businesses operate on three continents. I speak almost 4 languages, and I have lived and worked across multiple Canadian provinces and in the United States. I understand firsthand the frustrations, yes, the frustrations of Western Canada, and especially Albertan. having witnesses successive federal liberal governments prioritize Ontario's interest while neglecting both Quebec and the West. However, the idea that Quebec benefit disproportionately from equalization is pure propaganda, and especially moreover, it oversimplifies a complex fiscal system, completely dysfunctional, by the way, and ignores the key economic realities. So let's jump into that, my second kind of message to all of you across this great nation. An history and a fiscal reality check, shall we? And let's go back to even before Canada existed. Before United States were even there. There was New England and New France. And King George was smart. Let's dive into it. King Louis XIII of France, the Roi Soleil, the Sun King, let New France, now only Quebec, drift away under the British Armada of King George V and kept Martinique Island in the tropical instead. This is a collective and historical trauma tied to another great resource of the time, sugar canes. Apparently, sugar canes was deemed better than a few acres of snow. Yes, according to Voltaire, quelques arpents de neige, a few acres of snow, who expressed this to King Louis XIII regarding the economic value of what will become Canada. Voltaire's derogatory assessment of the economic value of Canada and therefore by extension New France as a colony in the 18th century reflected a caricatured vision that was prevalent in certain bourgeois circles of metropolitan France at the time. This expression has since become ingrained in Quebec popular culture and post-traumatic trauma and is regularly cited, played, and in music, as I just did now. Because that was the decision of the king, influenced by Voltaire, to let go of New France. So, that said, for those who understand the intersection of psychology and political science with sociology through transgenerational behavior and distant trauma, the reality is that the modern Quebec is rich in resources, but unfortunately poor in great philosopher and politician that could aim higher. And I agree with that. We are far more than maple syrup, sugarcane, and hydroelectricity. We are the largest geographical province in Canada and the second most populous. We pay the highest income tax, individual income tax, and also the income tax on small and medium business that I represent, and other many taxes. And this for the entire North America, among the 61 states, province, and territory, or 62 now because they divide Northwest Territory in two, something like this. But among this 62 U.S. and provinces, we are on the top one. Wow, top one of most taxed. And even I think proportionally, we're even more taxed than the most taxed country of Scandinavia, where a lot of politicians in Quebec aim to compare themselves for the social soi-disant democracy, social democrat policy. So we have also on top of this, why we are so overtaxed, it's because we have an oversized and since 2004, a very ineffective and centralized government in Quebec City with excessive spending on social programs that have put much of the population into a state of lethargy and dependence on the state. I personally hate that very much. I am an independent thinker who believes in individual responsibility and a smaller government. But my unrepresented view of sociological and political economic in Quebec is not what matters here. My message is to my fellow Westerners, whom I deeply respect and love, and I want them to understand that Quebec is more than that welfare state you often perceive and judge. It is often used as a scapegoat by some I said, English Canadians, to justify a certain level of resentment. When in reality, we should be working together to build the modern nation state that Canada could become, a true confederation of indigenous, English, and French nations living in togetherness in a real diversity within a decentralized federation. Quebec sent more, a lot more to Ottawa than it receives. And this is from both statistic organization on economic and accountability from both Ottawa and Quebec City. And it's also from the Revenue and Treasury Board Ministry here in Quebec City, and as well as the Treasury Board of Canada. So despite this big number you often see into English Canadian podcaster to scapegoat Quebec of this $13.6 billion received in federal transfer. Oh la la, welfare states, you poor Quebecers, you receive so much money, and just from Alberta, like Ontario don't pay, and Quebec don't pay either. You'll see that. Yeah. So this is including also all of the other illegal federal, or at least anti-constitutional federal expenditure and provincial jurisdiction, such as healthcare and education. Quebec contribute, so that's all the money that we send. And remember, we are the most taxes, especially on the income tax. So Quebec contributes to approximately, according to the same agency, $83 billion to Ottawa in 2021 through income tax, GST transfer, and other federal taxes for both individual and small and medium business especially. So do the math, guys. 83 billion minus 13.6 billion. And I remind you that we are now almost 8.9 million people, the most taxed, with the lowest average wage, and inside a dysfunctional federation with a mismanaged equalization program that only fuels division and resentment. If you only see one side of the in and out, the input compared to the outcome. So that's bring me to my last chapter, my third thing, probably the most important of this message, not only to Dr. Peterson argument and other podcaster in the West that portray Quebec as the nagging, malveillant, siphoning provinces of this country, like we have nothing else than maple syrup, as we've been ditched by the French royalty before the American Revolution. So that's a funny thing. Just before giving my message to Quebec, I'd like to put this in perspective because it's something that a lot of historians, whether they are English Canadian, French Canadian, or from all around the world, they kind of, it's only when I have great conversation with people from Connecticut or New Hampshire, when we do the reenactment of the French and the British battling to preserve New France up until the conquest in 1760, something like 15 years before the American Revolution War and the Independence War. Could you imagine that? So the British were preparing to encircle the United States. So I find it very, very, very interesting to see a Jordan Peterson going to live in Scottsdale, Arizona, becoming more an American, less lecturing us about the responsible citizenship of the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, telling that we need a discourse, and he do propaganda. He do a kind of misleading message that, oh, Quebec is so poor. The French majority people is asking too much. We are asking too much? I don't see where. We are about 2% of the entire continent population linguistically. We are proud of our roots from the French monarchy. We wanted actually more than one. Actually, the French with Lafayette, with Benjamin Franklin. The French and the French Canadian have more in common with the American, the Middle America, than the American and the Middle American could have with the English Canadian. Because remember that, American people who could watch it. Every time you hear an English Canadian bashing a French Canadian and try to make deal with you guys, remember that the French Canadian are more Republican in the sense of the state-wise. We are not monarchists. We are Republican in that sense, the Republic state, than the English Canadian, because most of the English Canadian descent. They descend from the loyalists and those you kicked out during your Revolutionary and Independence War. Remember that. And this is, of course, a constituent generalization. And I'm sure Dr. Peterson could agree if he's honest intellectually on that point. And anyone honest intellectually and historically speaking knows that. Canada has been built on the back of real Canadian, and the real Canadian were those French colonists. The maple leaf flag is from a French. The national anthem of Canada was in French. The first capital of this new kind of Canada Union was Montreal, until the English Montrealers burned it to move it to Upper Canada and Ottawa. That's the true reality, fact, not based on any bias or any point of view. So my message to Quebec, despite all of this objective thing, is rise up and stand with Alberta, Quebec. Yes, it has been more than 10 years since some of us, entrepreneur and center-right conservatives in Quebec, we were so optimistic about la CAQ, which is this kind of conservative center-right, we thought, created by François Legault and a deceived liberal Charles Sirois and others. An entrepreneur himself, a fiscal conservative himself, even when he was into the PQ, he was part of the right wing of this independence coalition. With his great Saint Laurent project, aiming to develop our gas and oil extraction and more industry and other resources into strategically autonomous economic development plan. It was even far superior than the liberal Jean Charest. Yes, liberal Jean Charest in Quebec. He was a conservative, or a so-called progressive conservative in Ottawa. The 2009 North Plan, which failed totally to liberate Quebecers from excessive taxation. The disappointment began in 2019 when Legault refused to align with then Premier Kenney of Alberta on equalization plan, to almost removed it, and made also, at the same moment, a 180-degree turn on the Eastern Pipeline and all the natural resource plan and the Saint Laurent project I described before, after meeting with the eco-dictator and ecological transition advocate Dominique Champagne and so many other woke here in Quebec. Oh, and then, of course, François Legault blamed the 2020 worldwide pandemic, should I call it scandemic, because we've been scammed here and abroad, for his backtracking on promises. His government became weak, engaged in mostly only political clientelism, even betraying many Quebec conservatives and centrists alike, with a lot of wokeness. So for conservative, you had a lot of wokeness, a lot of ESG, DIE policy, and what have you. And This led to a rise in support for the Conservative Party of Quebec, like a phoenix from the ashes, because we didn't have a Conservative Party since Duplessis' year. So that's the thing. In Quebec, it seems to the right is almost non-existent because it's always a kind of a generational party. That was l'Union Nationale of Duplessis, apparently center-right. And then after, even the Liberal in Quebec under Jean Lesage were more center-right, center, and center-left. But we never had a real conservative party. And I'm wondering, with names like Progressive Conservative under Mulroney back in when I was young, if we have even true conservatism here in Canada. So anyway, that could be another clip to explain this ideas better. But to finish my message to Quebec and to Québécois, that's all this deception, this logo deception, this fake center-right application, and so much deep entrenched social democratic province of Quebec, I agree. It's betraying a lot of us who would like progress, real progress. Not progressism or Marxist, no, real progress of our capitalist economic system. And even the worst thing is if Canada and some Quebecers says, oh, the PQ, it's done. We don't have any more of this independence debate to worry about. Surprise. And many by-election inside Quebec and even on the federal riding, we saw the rise of PQ and the Bloc. That's unfortunate. Now, in 2025, with this MAGA resurgence at our southern border, the second term of President Trump, I once again call on my fellow French Canadian, especially in Quebec, to hold Legault government accountable. He must return to his original principle and side with Premier Smith against the circus of Carney Trudeau, centralist and globalist con artist. We should unite in demanding a real Canadian federation once and for all, decentralized and respectful of all provincial economies, with a smaller and more efficient government in Ottawa, and even in all provincial capitals. And moreover, if Legault is truly committed to the well-being of all Quebecers, he should join force with Albertans and push for the end of equalization. And I propose simply that all provinces retain the income tax revenues by abolishing the federal income tax, keep your money, your citizen money, and redistribute it inside your provinces, and which is, anyway, this federal income tax is as illegitimate as our 1982 constitution that Quebec and the Aboriginal people never agreed and signed. So finally, Dr. Peterson and all my fellow friends across Canada, can we aim to unite together with our differences, but with a common goal to live freely, responsibly, and intelligently, without propaganda, without scapegoating each other, to save not only Canada, but also our Western civilization with responsible governance and the right to self-determination at both the national and individual levels. And remember who you truly are. You are wonderful, you are powerful, and you are free to be whoever you wanted to be and to do whatever you wanted to do, and always in respect of one another. Thank you so much for listening. See you soon.